You don't need a large-scale dairy operation to make incredible cheese. With just a few minutes and a mini flock of sheep, I'm going to show you how you can make the most delicious and simple farmstead cheeses to make at home. Hello shepherds, welcome back. And if you're new here, hello. This is where we talk all things sheepy. My name's Megan, and today we're going to transform sheep's milk into one of the most simplest and easy hard cheeses to make. So let's break this down. When I first started making cheeses several years ago, I started with soft cheeses, but eventually I wanted to make easy, flavorful, but also versatile hard cheeses. And this is one of my favorite cheeses to lean into. So farmstead cheeses are a pretty broad type of cheese. Traditionally, it means a cheese made from milk collected directly on the same farm that the cheese is made. Whereas most cheeses, artisan included, often are using purchased milk that's then transported to their facility to then make the cheeses. So these at-farm made cheeses tend to be made with milk using time-honored methods, some of which have been passed down through generations, focusing on quality over quantity.
Yeah, what's that smell from?
And each batch of cheese is often unique to not only the animals, the land, the season, and even the weather, all of which affect the livestock's diet and then their milk. So when working with your own dairy animals, it seems like any cheese can be a farmhouse cheese. But I kind of think of it like a menu at a restaurant and soup of the day. And so for today's cheese, we're making a mesophilic-based cooked curd hard cheese. So let's discuss the ingredients. I'm using my fresh sheep's milk, but almost any milk you have on hand will do. If you're using store-bought milk, make sure to stay away from ultra-pasteurized milk. And some places do sell minimally processed milk, but the main thing to remember is if you have any problems, the first thing to do is swap the brand of your milk, or in the case of a home dairy, check your milk handling processes from start to finish really. And so I'm using a late lactation skimmed sheep's milk. I like to make butter about once a week. Because this is more of a home dairy, skimming the cream off the top of the sheep's milk doesn't really get every drop of cream out, and so our cheese will still be creamy, just because of the nature of the sheep's milk too. But if you want a full fat cheese, feel free to use whole milk. Or even if you want to add cream back into the milk, you can do that too. This is a pretty versatile recipe. Sheep's cheese by its own nature will yield a very white cheese, and if you want to add some color back into it, one of the more traditional methods is to use an annatto cheese coloring. So that's an option for you too. We'll also need some rennet. I'm using a common single-strength liquid rennet. If you're using another form of rennet, it's important to follow the instructions for your specific type of rennet and rennet strength. When diluting our rennet, we'll use water. I'm on well water, but if you're on city water that has a lot of chlorine in it, that will interact with your rennet. So an alternative is distilled or bottled plain water. And if you're using store-bought milk, it really helps to add calcium chloride back into your milk. This kind of helps firm up your curds a bit, increasing your cheese yield, improving the texture and moisture level of your final cheese. And on the note of salt, I'm using sea salt, but any kosher or non-iodized salt will also work. Next up, let's talk about our tools. One of the biggest hurdles to cheese making is how to press our cheeses. So cheese presses come in many forms, from a simple cheesecloth with cutting boards balanced with weights. When I first started making hard cheeses, I wasn't sure if I wanted the investment in the equipment because it can be expensive and big. So one of my first presses was the 2 cutting board method with weights balanced on top. This can be tricky but doable, so it's important to find a method that works really well for your household and your workload. I really like a tight-knit curd with very few mechanical holes, so eventually I moved to a handmade Dutch press or a type of lever press. I also have a tofu press that works really well with mini cheeses. It's a type of spring press, and they really do make larger versions of this for cheese making if that's something you're interested in. Other tools that are handy in a home dairy is a thermometer. We'll also need a knife that can reach to the bottom of your pot and have some way to either water bath your pot or nestle your pots in, which really helps in maintaining a stable temperature with ease, but also prevents scorching on the bottom of the pot. And some optional things to have later on are like a pH meter just to dial in your cheese making. But learning how to make cheese intuitively is also fun. Don't forget your cheese log or taking notes also helps. I have a cheese log for free in my shop if you want to download it, but Anyway, let's get started making our cheese. Also, before I get started, let's make sure that all your equipment is sterilized. I like to use a boiling water bath, and on that note, let's actually start. I'm going to use a direct heat to start, so turning the burner on low heat, let's add our milk to our heavy bottom pot. We're aiming to heat our milk to about 88 degrees Fahrenheit or 31 degrees Celsius. It's the ideal temp for our mesophilic cultures to do their work and flavor our cheese. Once our milk reaches our temperature, let's add in our culture. Also, if you're using pasteurized milk or store-bought milk, now's the time to add our calcium chloride in, and any annatto or cheese coloring that you're choosing to use too. I'm leaving my milk basic untoasted bread white. So make sure you stir your milk very well, combining all the additives, coloring, and cultures. If you're using culture powder, it helps to sprinkle the culture in and then let it rehydrate for a couple of minutes before stirring it in. For liquid or frozen cultures, I like to just plop it in and give it time to thaw before mixing it in. After we added our cultures, we're going to let our cultures work for about 60 minutes, stirring often. The milk needs to be kept at around 88 degrees Fahrenheit or 31 degrees Celsius for about 60 minutes. I like to stir every few minutes this time since the cream can still rise slowly and I want it to be fully incorporated in our milk. So now that an hour has passed and our cultures have fully multiplied and spread their goodness throughout our milk, it's time to add our rennet. This is a later kind of lactation milk, so I'm not adding any extra rennet, but if you are using spring milk versus a fall milk, you may notice how later on during the cutting stage, the curds are noticeably softer, but it's okay to work with. But this amount has worked pretty well throughout the months for me. I'm diluting my rennet in our well water. I like to add a minimum of about 1/4 of a cup or around 50 milliliters of water to the rennet to dilute it. This is to avoid those coagulation clumps when we're adding our rennet to the milk. And all that water will come out with the whey as well later on. So let's go ahead and stir our rennet up really well. Up and down, around, back and forth, from anywhere between 30 to 60 seconds, and then stop stirring. Our milk needs to rest for about 30 minutes to fully coagulate into a curd mass. Our milk may start to thicken up even by like 8 to 10 minutes, but it's still important to let our curd fully form before cutting. Once our milk fully coagulates and transforms into the curds, it's time to cut our curds and release all that whey. One of the easiest ways to tell when it's time to cut is to watch the curds. They may pull away from the edges of the pot. Store-bought milk will always form softer curds than fresh sheep's milk, and that's okay. It's just the nature of the milk. So when we cut our curd, there's this solidified mass. We can see if we need to let our curds coagulate more, or if it's ready by judging the quality of the cut and the whey being expelled. I'm looking for a firm, clean line, and that the curds feel a lot like baked custard. They're firm yet soft, there's clean cut lines, and they readily hold their shape, rather than shattering or falling apart when cut. The whey will start to expel as soon as you begin cutting and fill in that space. It should be cloudy but not milky, clearish but not crystal clear. As the curds firm up, the whey will get more and more clear. So if you cut your curds and see a lot of whites or milky hue to your whey, stop and give your curds about 10 minutes and then try cutting your curds again. If your whey is super clear, then you know you're cutting pretty late and it's ready to cut. So let's go ahead and cut our curds, first vertically. I'm spacing my cuts about 1/2 inch or first knuckle to fingertip in size. And then I'm resting my curds a heel for about 5 minutes. This is so I retain more moisture in my final cheese. If you prefer a drier cheese, cut the curds to maybe the size of a pea. And then after resting the curds, I'm going to go back in and cut my curds into their final cube form. I'm trying to make sure that my knife reaches across the pot and slice as evenly as possible. Just like with cooking, having everything as even and consistent as possible helps the whey expel consistently as well. It's not so much of a problem with younger cheeses, but as the cheese ages, the moisture pockets and the unevenness of moisture loss really increases that chance of causing problems. But try not to fret too much about it. We can catch any curds we miss as we stir our curds later on. The size you cut your curds and how you handle your curds, as well as the heat, all affect the final flavor, texture, and character of your cheese. So when you're consistent with each step, your cheese will reflect that consistency. So now a few minutes have passed, so our curds were able to heal a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and pop them into a water bath. And at this time, we're still at 88 degrees Fahrenheit or 31 degrees Celsius. And we want to slowly and gently stir our curds. It will be tough at first, but the curds will expel their whey and they'll shrink up, and then the stirring will get easier and easier. So as we're stirring, it helps to cut up any of these pieces that we may have missed. And after about 5 to 10 minutes, our curds have dried out a little bit, and it's time to very slowly cook our curds. At the beginning, the curd cubes are very wet and soft inside and out. But as we take our time cooking the curds, they'll slowly move the whey from inside the curd to expel out. If we cook our curds too fast, it'll form a skin that makes it really difficult for that curd to expel all that whey inside, which makes it so that our curds are dry on the outside, but wet on the inside, which will cause problems later on with aging. So as we cook our curds, we want to very slowly, over the course of 30 to 40 minutes, reach our final temperature of 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius. Every few minutes, I add some hot water into our pot. I personally find this to be the trickiest part, so I tend to go slower than needed. While we're cooking our curds, it's important to check it back in with our curds every couple of minutes, stirring them around. I like to check their temperature as well, and just make sure that the whey is circulating around, evenly distributing that heat, and making sure that each curd is expelling its whey. During this time too, all those mesophilic bacteria are still chugging away, acidifying our curds. That will later on give our cheese its sharp flavor. You'll see your curds slowly shrinking and drying out too. Once our target temp is reached, it's time to hold that temp for a little more than an hour. Make sure during this cooking process to keep stirring our curds every couple minutes. The final curd should be firm and bouncy. There's some judgment here, so don't forget to take notes, so later on it'll be easier to troubleshoot. But for now, our curds are ready. It's time to let them settle to the bottom of the pan, and this will make them easier to scoop. Okay, so about 5 minutes have passed, so let's go ahead and remove our whey, salt our curds, and then transfer them to our cheesecloth. If you want to reserve your whey to make ricotta, it helps to line a colander over a bowl to catch all that whey. I'm going to feed this whey to our livestock, and we want to drain our curds for about an hour in a room that's around 72 degrees Fahrenheit to 22 degrees Celsius or higher. After an hour has passed, let's go ahead and take our curds and break them up gently into about walnut-sized pieces and mix in our salt to the ratio of about 2% salt to final curd weight. With our sheep's milk, our final curd weight tends to be around 1 pound or around 540-ish grams. So for salt, it'll be around 0.31 ounces or 1.5 teaspoons or 9 grams of salt. But just make sure to weigh your curds now if you're not sure how much salt to add. Okay, so let's go ahead and form our curds. With this step, we're going to pack our curds into our mold that we've already lined with our cheesecloth. We're going to press our cheese at around 10 pounds or 4 kilograms of pressure per 10 minutes for the first press. There'll be a lot more whey exposed, but with each subsequent press, there'll be less and less whey. So let's go ahead and start light, and then after about an hour, we're going to flip, redress our cheese, and then increase our weight to about 25 pounds or 11 kilograms and press for 3 hours. Then we're going to flip, redress, and then increase our weight to 50 pounds or 22 kilograms and press for another 9 hours. And then we're going to flip and redress and press again at 50 pounds or 22 kilograms and press for another 9 hours. And then when I take it out, it's going to have some bounce to it. It feels compact but not spongy. It smells fresh. Often the cheesecloth will still leave some marks on the cheese. So during the dry part, I like to make sure that the surface is drying on is smooth, since it still moves a little bit and settles even at this stage. So next up, we're going to dry our cheese and form that beautiful rind that will protect our cheese from molds or bad bacteria. The cheese should be allowed to surface dry for about 1 to 5 days, depending on how dry your area is. You can dry it in the fridge if you want, but bring it back up to room temperature prior to waxing it. I like to flip the cheese a minimum of twice per day, and I put it in a dry spot on a cutting board or wrap it in a clean but dry cheesecloth and basically monitor how the rind formation is going along. The cheese will darken a little bit and it should feel pretty dry. So if you want to go fancy and give it an oil rub once you have your rind developed, or do a wine brine soak or bandage, that's super fun. But for ease, I'm waxing our cheese. If you have a vacuum pack machine, I know people who swear by it. So there are a lot of ways to transform the flavor of our cheeses even now. I'm going to put 3 even and overlapping coats of wax on my cheese. I like to use a hot wax so it goes on thin, especially if I end up brushing on the wax, so it gets a nice even coverage. And then once I'm done waxing it, I'm just going to go ahead and scratch in the name and date. Then off to age. Ideally, we want our cheese aging space to be around 52 to 56 degrees Fahrenheit or 11 to 13 degrees Celsius, with the relative humidity around 80 to 85%. And then as it's aging, we're going to continue to flip about twice per week for the first 2 weeks, and then once per week thereafter. If you decide to do a natural rind, it helps to brush off any unwanted mold growth with a brining rag and check your wheels for any cracks developing or anything that might seam off. This cheese can be aged for about 4 to 6 weeks and then it'll be ready to eat. And then depending on your setup, anything from like a root cellar, ice room, basement, or mini fridge can work. So let's go ahead and crack one open that's already been aged. This one's an older cheese. It's about 2 months old. So let's go ahead and sample it. It has a firm, creamy texture with still some mechanical holes. It has a sharp, earthy flavor. Usually I end up with just over a pound. This one's about a pound or around 540 grams. With our sheep's milk, the hard cheeses yield tends to be about 2 pounds or 1,000 grams per gallon. And as it ages, it will lose some weight as it dries. And how much moisture it loses depends on the brine treatment, the humidity management, and aging areas. Often I just age it a bit in our mini fridge in the basement, and then as we crack into our cheeses, I just pop it into our cheese drawer in the regular fridge. It's not an ideal temp for aging because it's too cold and it'll slow down the aging process, but it works. And then I just re-wax the cheese as we cut into them, especially for the drier cheeses. So this is a pretty good all-around cheese, and there's so many ways to modify the flavor in each step of the way. But I like how it's a good introduction to hard cheese making. Let me know what kind of cheeses you're planning on making. And if you've made it this far, an extra special thank you. I appreciate you. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you found it helpful, please give me a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell icon so you never miss a sheepy take. Until next time, stay soft, stay fluffy, and most importantly, stay true to you.